Okay. Well, everybody, welcome to our Municipal Solid Waste Management and Resource Recovery Advisory Council meeting for Thursday, October 14th. The first thing I want to do is just do a welcome and then do introductions, go around. I'm not sure if the right term is appointed, delegated, or drafted, but I am the president for MSWRRAC going forward. I'll try to do as good a job as Holly did, or at least close to that. So anyhow, glad to be in this role. We've got a number of new members, and I know we've got to do roll call. So Diane, my thought was we go around, if you want to do the roll call and call folks, so not everybody's speaking up at once, you can call roll call and then introduce the new members. And then if the new members just tell a little bit about themselves, I think that'd be great.
Okay, we can do that. That seems to have worked the best since we started the virtual meetings. Okay, so Trent Perez. Okay, Scott Trebus.
I am here.
And do you want to explain?
Good morning, everyone. Scott Trebus. I work with Republic Services, and I represent a solid waste company that specializes in commercial operations.
Risa Weinberger.
I'm here. I'm Risa Weinberger, and I'm with Risa Weinberger and Associates, and I'm an engineer, and I represent composters and educators.
Okay. David Yonke.
I am here. I am with the president of New Gen Strategies and Solutions, and I represent the financial community.
Tom Yardley, and he is one of our new members.
Yes, good morning. My name is Tom Yardley. I represent the city of Portland, which is a community elected official. I forget the size at the group I'm in, but on the smaller side of elected officials. My background, I retired from the Navy in 2015. Like many people that joined the service, I was looking, for ways to continue to serve after I retired. I had a few acquaintances asked me if I'd ever consider running for city council, and I flatly said no. I had never thought about that. But in a roundabout way, I got elected to our city council here, and I'm on my second term. And I am also a member of the San Patricio County Economic Development Corporation Board. And for those of you who are not familiar with the area down here, we are currently in a very strong industrial growth period. And by that, I mean investments of tens of billions of dollars in our local area in major industrial complexes. In fact, this week I went to a ribbon cutting ceremony for JM Steel, which is one of the companies that's on the Steel Dynamics campus, which is a very large, obviously steel producer, but they have a bunch of other companies that have tied in with them, and JM Steel is one of those. Also right here in the Portland area, we have Exxon Sabic, which is their Gulf Coast Group Ventures plant that is now just coming online for plastics production. We have Cheniere, which is an LNG plant. Vostapene, which makes basically iron briquettes. Those are all new facilities that are right here in our local area. So Portland, before the census, we were a town of less than 20,000 people. The latest census, we're now above 20,000. And the last count I had, we have about 1,200 to 1,400 new home sites in some phase of development, one way or another. So if that gives you an idea of how quickly we are growing in this area, that's kind of what we're dealing with down here. So I'm happy to be selected to the board. I'm not an expert in solid waste management, but I'm trying to learn and get up to speed. So thank you.
Well, Tom, thank you. Thanks for your service, and we'll look forward to having you on the board and learning about garbage and recycling.
It was my honor to serve. Thank you.
Yes. Tenel Atkins, Councilman Atkins.
Yes, My name is Councilman Tanel Atkins. I am the Chair of Economic Development for the City of Dallas. Just going on my second term. I was former Mayor Pro Tem, Vice Chair of Transportation. I've been around a long time. I'm here to serve, and whatever I can do and whatever resources the City of Dallas can help you to move this needle forward, I'm here to serve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
You.
Richard Ambrowitz? Is he with us this morning? I know I had an email with him earlier today.
Richard, I think you're on mute.
Richard, I gave you permission.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was listed as a, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry, I
There
was
you
listed
are.
as a, I was listed as a member and, I mean, an attendee instead of a presenter. I'm here, I'm a new member, I'm representing the public. I've been in the solid waste recycling industry for 40 plus years. I know many of you and on this board already, on this council. I'm a member of STAR, the State of Recycling, State of Texas Association for Recycling. I'm a chair of the Business Council, and I'm looking forward to participating in this council.
Welcome. Cheryl Murgo.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Murgo. I'm with the Houston Galveston Area Council. I'm one of the 24 COGs in Texas, and I have the privilege of representing a planning region.
Chuck Rivette.
Hey, good morning. My name's Chuck Rivette. I just was reappointed to the council. I've served here for a while. Richard, welcome to see you again on our council. You're one of the old guys I remember. I represent a solid waste professional with experience managing and operating a commercial landfill.
Jeffrey Mayfield.
Morning, I'm Jeff Mayfield. I'm the Deputy Director for Solid Waste and Integrated Services with the North Texas Municipal Water District, and I represent a public solid waste district or authority.
Okay. Richard McHale.
Morning, Richard McHale. I'm the Deputy Director for the City of Austin's Resource Recovery Department, and I represent, I'm an official that represents cities and county solid waste agencies.
Okay. Scott Pasternak.
Hi, good morning. I'm Scott Pasternak with Burns & McDonnell. I lead our solid waste and resource recovery consulting and engineering practice for the state of Texas, and I represent the general public.
Okay. Steve Shannon, and he's one of our new members.
I think Steve's in the same boat as I was. I think I saw him listed as an attendee, not a presenter.
Cody, do you have him?
Working on it.
Okay. I'll come back. David Dillard, Judge Dillard. I don't see him on the list. Frank Pugsley, one of our new members.
Hi, good morning. Frank Pugsley. I'm with Park Hill, and I am a professional engineer from a private engineering firm with experience in the design and management of solid waste facilities. I am assuming this role as Holly Holder rolled off, recently appointed. Holly sends his regards to everybody. Sad he can't be here. It's been a good experience for him. But in general, I have over 18 years of experience in solid waste consulting from the engineering side, and also spent several years working for a municipal government, and looking forward to learning from everyone and serving on the committee or council.
Jennifer Lutz, she's also one of our new members. She may not be. Did you allow her in yet? There's a Jennifer as guest, Cody.
Jennifer, you should be able to speak.
Perfect, thank you. Good morning, Jennifer Lutz. I am representing tire processors. I work for Silver Creek Materials up here in Dallas-Fort Worth, and have been in the environmental industry for over 20 years in various capacities, from emergency response to waste management to all kinds of special waste. But in this regard, I am looking forward to serving on the council representing tire recycling processors.
Thank you. Mr. Shannon, are you available? Are you?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me
Great.
now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Shannon. I'm a new member. I'm representing a private environmental conservation organization. In this case, it would be the State of Texas Alliance for Recycling. That would my membership there that would qualify me to fill this seat. I am the vice chair of the business council of STAR. I thought that I had retired after 45 years in the solid waste industry, but find myself back in the saddle and glad to be there. I look forward to serving on this committee. I am honored to be selected to serve on this council, I should say, and look forward to learning and contributing in every way that I can. Thank you.
Okay. So I have absent today Judge Dillard and and Councilman Perez. I've checked the guest list and I don't see either one of them. So I think, Mr. Yonke, I think we have concluded our roll call.
Great. Appreciate that. I think the first thing, if you're looking at your agenda, we have to get a nomination and approval of a vice president. I served as the vice president in that position to Holly, and I've moved up to this role. So does anyone have any nominations for the vice president for our advisory council?
I nominate Jeff Mayfield.
Okay. Thanks, Chuck. Any other nominations? Okay. Hearing none. Diane, do we have to just put this out for an informal say aye, or is that how we do it?
Someone needs the motion.
Thank you.
Or second it. Chuck may.
We'll either move or second the motion from Chuck.
All right.
Sorry.
Motion.
So Scott's motion.
Yep.
Okay.
Scott's motion for Jeff to serve as the vice president. Is there a second?
I will second Scott's motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, great.
It's unanimous. Jeff, we look forward to you serving as the vice president for the MSWRRAC.
All right. Well, you appreciate the nomination and the support. And, got big footsteps I'll be filling.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. I believe we're going to have a waste permits division update. Megan is going to be providing that.
Good morning. My name is Megan Hinson. I'm the section manager of the Business and Program Services section inside the Waste Permits Division. And Charlie usually gives an overall update. She's not here today, and so I'm going to give a very focused update on an alternative language rule implementation and public participation plan. So TCEQ is preparing to implement rule changes regarding alternative language and implement a public participation plan. Now, first, looking at the rule changes, the Commission adopted the changes to Chapter 39 on August 25th, 2021, with an effective date of May 1st, 2022. So the rule changes include providing notice documents and response to comments in languages other than English, and providing interpretation services during public meetings and requests for hearings. The new rule also requires a plain language summary that may need to be translated to languages other than English if certain criteria are met in rule. An agency work group has been developed, and we're working on strategies on best practices and implementation requirements for these rule changes. And as part of this, stakeholder meetings are going to be a really important part of developing the strategy. So the agency is gathering input from stakeholders, both industry and the public, through virtual workshops on what guidance, templates, and any kind of meetings would be useful to meet the new requirements. The first webinar is tentatively scheduled for November 4th, and we will use agency listserv, social media, agency website, etc., to announce the details once finalized. So again, that workshop is just going to focus on the rule changes for Chapter 39 relating to alternative language. Now, the second part is developing strategies to implement a new public participation plan. This plan provides guidance to TCEQ staff, the regulated community, and the public in understanding expectations for meaningful public participation. So there'll be future workshops, stakeholder workshops to gather input from industry and the public on successful implementation of the plan. And similarly, these workshops will be announced through agency listservs, social media, agency websites, etc. Waste Permits Division anticipates changes to notice templates, applications, and guidance documents as part of the implementation of both those alternative language rule changes and the public participation plan. And we'll keep the regulated community and stakeholders informed of relevant changes throughout the process. And we really encourage you to participate in these workshops as we announce them, so we can get, again, that involvement to make sure as applicants will have the information they need to meet these requirements, and stakeholders and the public will have information they need to be able to successfully participate in the permitting process. Any questions?
Megan, thank you for that update. Members, are there any questions, comments? And I guess specifically, I'm curious for those of you that are involved in the permitting process for landfills or what have you, if you have questions, comments regarding these proposed rule changes.
Dave, this is Cheryl. I have a question. It may not be relevant. So a lot of us have contracts with the TCEQ. Will these requirements be put in the contracts and required for your grantees to follow, especially for the interpretation and various items like that?
Not at this time. We're focusing on the permits and things that fall under Chapter 39 or that reference Chapter 39, and other sections of the rule. Same with the public participation plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have a question on that then, Megan. The prior presidents that have filled this seat, were professional engineers, PEs, so they're much more familiar with the rules, and I come from a finance background. So Cheryl, bringing up that comment, just a quick question. So these proposed rule changes would primarily affect just landfills, or would it affect registrations? Who would they impact?
So this is across the agency. It's for a variety of permitting. That could be air permitting. It could be MSW, IHW. Registrations, it depends. Again, if the public notice requirements that are tied to it, that's where we're seeing a lot of so the rules have, just to be clear, the rules have been adopted by the commission. So they're no longer in the proposal stage, they're adopted. So now we're coming up with strategies to make sure we're successfully implementing these. So again, it would be permits across the agency, especially those that require public notice. So when you think of the NORIs and NAFTIs, as we call them in the agency, those are going to be the main focus, and there may be some registrations that are also brought into some of these requirements.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions on this before we move on?
Just real quick, Megan, and you may be repeating yourself, and I just didn't hear it. I apologize. The alternative language tripwires are requirements are still tied to the local school requirements. So if the local school has an alternative language requirement, then the public notice requirements are triggered also?
I believe some of those have changed. I don't have all the details in front of me right now, but that's information we're going to make sure is in any applications, any guidance documents we provide to applicants, and that will be communicated throughout the workshops and any kind of information we put out regarding the rule changes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Megan, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we're going to get a MSW permit section update, and Chance, looks like you're up.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Good morning.
Well, I'm happy to announce that I have now acquired 5G internet capabilities out here in the country. So I can have my camera on and talk at the same time. So positive things happening out here in the country when it comes to connecting to the world.
How come we don't have pictures of cows behind you?
Yeah. So anyway, good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys and the new faces. Welcome. And this is a pretty lax bunch, and there's not any stressful discussion points that we have going on currently. I know we have some emails about is there anything that somebody needs to be brought up to speed on, and we've been rolling along for quite some time, addressing different things that we bring to you for guidance, and happily to say that we've been getting feedback and answers to that and moving on quite seamlessly. So I appreciate the advice that this council has been providing for the time that I've been a part of it. So here's to continue to work that we have before us and addressing those issues in a positive manner. So I do have a few updates to provide. I always start out with the organizational chart. So I think you got attachment in your email in that regard. And as of today, we have 2 environmental permit specialists on team 1 that are vacant, and 1 engineer position in team 2. So that's our current vacancies at this point. Last time we met, we had several vacancies. Those have been filled, and I wanted to introduce the 2 team leaders that we had vacant last time, and one of them is in training today. Some of you may know him. He's been in the industry for quite some time, Burgess Stingle. He's one of the team leaders that we have, and thankful to have. And then the other one was a current TCQ employee, Nikki Clark. She was able to join us. Hi, say hi, Nikki.
Hello.
Hello.
So she came over from the Office of Air. So she was happy to jump ship from air to waste and try something new. So I wanted to at least put a face with a name. Thank you for jumping on, Nikki, today. And since we last met, we had 24 major projects in the queue, and today we have 22, so 2 have dropped off. 8 of those are registrations. Now, mind you, these are just our major projects. We, new, major, limited, or limited scope amendment projects. We still have many reports and modifications and NOIs that we do as well. And before I jump into updating you on a rulemaking project, I wanted to kind of have a discussion on the annual report. So I understand that you were mailed a copy of the 2020 MSW annual report. Hopefully you received that in the mail. If not, there's a link that was provided to the annual report. And as always, this report couldn't happen without Miss Diane Barnes and her team that put it together. So many kudos goes out to her, but I just wanted to highlight a few things from the report that bring it to your attention. I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see if I can. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let me go to page 5, the infamous landfill map that we have. Out of 415 of the landfills that reported this year, we had I'm sorry, let me back up. 415 out of 545 reports, received this year for the report. And that's about a 3% increase from the last year. So that everyone seems to be using the steers to report their information to us. As of today, we still have 198 active landfills, and that's you can see that on page 5 of the report. And we have 57 years of remaining capacity statewide. You can see that on page 16. It's the same number of landfills from last year, but we've increased by 2 years for type 1s. We have 57 years remaining capacity for type 1 landfills. All the COGs have more than 10 years of remaining capacity, and that's the same as last year. Look at page 19 of that report. Right here, we see that okay. The lowest capacity is the Concho Valley COG, and they have 17 years. There's a slight increase in the estimated population with a little over 235,000 tons decrease in tons disposed from the FY 2019 report. Let me move this over a little bit. There we go. And that's a decrease in 2% in the calculated and remaining years of statewide capacity, increased to 54 years right here. And don't forget our processors. We have 211 active processors, and that's one less type 5 facility than last year. So our report obviously can be found on our website under the annual summary of municipal solid waste management in Texas. And we are already starting the call-in for the 2021 annual report. So our reports are due no later than November 10th of 2021. And we will call-in emails will be sent out to our facility owners and operators. So any questions about submitting reports, we send them our way, and we love it if y'all obviously report those things on online through our Steers platform. So just to tout that, the reason we like it reported online, the benefits of that is that, you know, they automatically calculate the data for you, and we have less errors in that regard. Automatically verifies your quarterly data, and then it decreases our processing time. And then you also get an email confirmation that you submitted a report. So there's lots of benefits to reporting online. So anybody have any questions in regards to our annual report?
Chance, I'll open it up in a second, but I just want to tell you and Diane and everyone else that works on it, that report, I know some people may look and say, okay, we're just filling out a report and it goes in a file and no one looks at it. And I will tell you, this is one of these reports. I just know a lot of cities and COGS and people like me use that report. It really helps to look at trends. We're hearing, we hear from more cities now in the large metro areas like the Houston area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You're starting to see some, you're right, they have all more than 10 years of capacity, but it may not be conveniently located within, say, that COG. And so looking at where these landfills are, where's the remaining capacity, it's that one is doing planning, or the private sector, about where the next landfill or expansion or what have you is going to be. So these reports are really important. So I appreciate the work you folks do on these. I'll open it up, see if anyone else has comments or questions on them. Okay.
Hey, this is Rich.
Steve, I have a question.
Let's have Richard first, then Steve.
Hey, thanks, Chance. Really good information, as David said. It's always good to see this report. I'm struck by the fact that population went up and per capita generation went down, which is always a good thing. But any idea why? Is TCEQ, given any thought to why that happened, or what's going on there?
I don't know off the top of my head why that would occur. It's been a unique year in itself, just with the pandemic and the things that you would think would happen because of that. But I don't know off the top of my head. No.
Well, this is for the time frame of September 1, 2019 to August 31, 2020, correct?
Yes, so there's a portion of that that has the...
That was dead in the meat of it. That was that's when the whole state went shut down in March.
Yeah, that's probably a good reason why. Yeah.
And I know volumes at many of our facilities dropped 10-20% during that time period. Businesses were closed. It was huge impact.
Yep. Forgot the time period. Yep.
Yeah, we can speculate like that, but we try not to, just because it's not factual.
And you shouldn't. That's why you have an advisory board like us, so we can speculate on your behalf. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure another impact, whether there were storm events during that period. We've seen that have a huge impact also if you didn't have storm events. So, okay.
Those storm events have become the norm.
Yeah.
Those trends might also be an indication of the relative significance of commercial and industrial generation in general relative to residential. And as commercial and industrial went down because of the pandemic, it's more of a noticeable hit because it was a larger number to begin with, and that's speculation.
Steve, I think you were up next.
All right, thank you. Yes, this report is very good. Lots of information, and I'm pleased to get it. I had a question, Chance, on page 7, table 1, and it's a list of the permitted and registered facilities, and basically type 5 facilities. And I see that over here in the recycling and material recovery 5RR category, there's none shown as permitted and only one shown as registered. I'm assuming that this category applies to the material recovery facilities that exist in most larger cities in the state. Can you help me understand what this line in this table is telling us?
I can take that question, Chance, if you'd like me to.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. It's
Part of
semantics.
it
Go
is
ahead.
yes, it's the types, and I'm thinking that eventually this particular category will probably drop off this table, because technically the recycling and material recovery facilities are transfer stations that have the ability to do material recovery, and it's a it's a database or a system issue. Our facilities that are type 5RR recovery facilities aren't able to report through the steers system. So for them to be able to do that, which is what we want them to do, I've changed them back to a type 5 TS as a transfer station. That may be something in the future that we'll be able to correct in our system, but at this time we're not. So it benefits our customers more so. Plus, plus by rule they are transfer stations. So I still have one that apparently is still submitting hard copy reports, and that's probably why it is labeled here in the report. So it's a combination of a couple of things. So
if I can ask a question and maybe clarify, that's not a listing of all recycled material recovery facilities. Majority or a large number of those are operated under a notice of intent, correct?
yes, sir. This
All
report
right.
is just for permitted and registered facilities.
So in order to have to seek a registration, which is a level higher than a notice of intent, I believe the threshold is there has to be more than 20% flow by or something like that. There's a threshold number that if you have to have more than 20 or some percent residual, then you have to get a registration.
Correct. Correct.
All right, thank you. I would like to make this comment, however, that this report is great report. It focuses largely, however, on disposal, and we're about to find out in a report from Scott here in a little while that recycling is handling 27.5% of our MSW in Texas. And don't see the magnitude of that reflected in this report. And I'm just suggesting that that's something that we might want to open our minds about in obtaining more information about that segment of our industry.
If we had requirements for that, we probably could have that in the report, but at this point, there's not too many reporting requirements for recyclers.
Yes.
We just have TVs and computers at this point, and that is handled, but that information is outside of this report. We have a link. I think we have a link to it in this report, but I could be wrong. We've done it in the past. Is that correct, Diane? Do we have a link to the TV report and the computer report?
Yes, sir. We have links to the recycling reports as well as the marketing development plan that we're going to be discussing. This report is when I inherited it, and from what I understand, we have this report is not mandated by the legislature, but the data in it is. We have to report biennial reports. We have our legislative budget board measures that are tied. The annual report data is tied to our legislative budget reports. So the focus, I think, was originally based on our capacity, the landfill capacity across the state. And so that with the planning for the waste planning for the COGS, everything is just tied together with that. And that is the focus landfills have, from my understanding, has always been the focus of this report. The processors, we went after a little bit later, and as far as making sure we had all the data for all the active reports. So hopefully that explains a little bit more of why the focus is on the capacity assessments across the state.
If you look on page 29, there's where we have information about that, and you can go to that information. Will take care of those recycling aspects.
And I saw Scott had his hand raised. I'm embracing technology here. So Scott, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, Chance and Diane covered it just when Chance was asking about whether there was a reference or a link to the recycling market development plan. That's there, as Chance just mentioned, on page 29. Yeah. And I think that's, this report is so helpful and has its specific purpose that I think to just have that link to the other plan that goes into so much detail, as we'll get into in a few minutes, to me makes a lot of sense. I mean, to try to put more of what's in the recycling market development plan in this document, may take away from the intent of what this report is focused on.
Scott, you were part of that group, weren't you? When we started this report?
You mean when I was at the agency?
Yes, back when you worked at TCEQ.
20 plus years ago? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did I present it correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. All right.
Well, that was a flashback.
Yeah.
Okay, Chance, anything else on your agenda?
Yeah, I didn't really have the annual report as a talking point on the agenda, but I do want to just kind of get you just an update on the rulemaking project that we've been doing in regards to composting. So the last time we met, the rulemaking was on track for proposal. So since then, the commissioners, they approved the proposal. That was on July 14th. And we had a virtual public meeting on August 23rd. We received 3 comments. One of them was from Risa. Thank you, Risa. And we are currently working through those comments, and it's on track, and we're planning to have that rule set for adoption on December 15th commissioner's agenda. So just giving you an update on that. So I try to give you keep an item on there, any kind of guidance or forms that we've updated, and since in between the times we meet, and we haven't really had anything this quarter in regards to that. But I do want to bring to your attention that we've made changes to the notice process, and we did that on September 1st. And so what you need to know is that our division has assumed some roles that was once performed by our chief clerk's office when it comes to noticing for your projects. And so the takeaway here, what you need to know is when it comes to proof of publication, that you now send, instead of sending that to the chief clerk's office, that you will start sending that to us, the Waste Permits Division, so we can handle that. Everything else is pretty much remains the same, but rest assured you don't have to write this down and get this out to all of your constituents or anything like that. We will be still sending very detailed notice instructions with your projects on the how-to for publishing and properly recording your notice. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, just a little tweak. We found that it just internally it's a little bit more efficient that when y'all provide verification of your notice that it comes to us, so we can jump on your project again and move it to the next step, rather than constantly having to ask OCC if they have it and having them track it down. So anyway, just a little efficiency that we found that we could do. And most of you probably know that the agency is currently in sunset review. If you didn't, we are. Those of you new, the legislature is looking at our performance. So it happens to us every 10 years. I think this is my third sunset review. Maybe, yeah. I think I came in the middle of one when I first hired on. But anyway, so if you're interested in providing comment about our performance, we have a web page on our site that can help allow you to do that. But we are basically in the first phase of it, and right now we have submitted our self-evaluation report to the Sunset Commission, and we are getting ready to be, I guess, interviewed by them. So we're in the process of being interviewed by various folks from that group, and it's a pretty long process. But after that, they'll hold a couple of public meetings and make recommendations to the legislature. So by the next time the legislature meets in 2023, we'll have some recommendations from them, if any, about the performance of our agency, what we do well, what we don't do well. Anyway, but there's several ways to comment. So on that, if you go to our main webpage, it's right there in the beginning. There's a little alert button to the left. You click it, it'll say sunset. If you click on that, it has all the ways that you can provide your input to them. And they just ask that you do that by February 1st of next year. So that's I guess that's when they're going to start finalizing their report. So they do say that your comment will be confidential. So I won't know if you complain about us.
Okay. With that, any other questions, comments on Chance's report?
Dave, this is Jeff. I had a real quick question about your vacancies. And are those 3 due to people leaving your team and replacement, or are any of those new positions?
No new positions. It is due to turnover. So, yes.
Any other questions? Okay. Chance, thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay. Next on the agenda, and I'm looking at the clock, I see we're 20 minutes behind schedule in my first meeting as president. I apologize for this. We'll try to make it up, but anyhow.
I'd have to apologize. I take some of that responsibility, Dave, because looking at the way we have the time structured, there's no way we could have introduced the amount of new members that we had in that short amount of time. But just know that we have allotted till noon, and if we want to go past noon, this little link will not turn us off. So we're good.
Good deal. Thank you. So next up, you folks have heard, over the last year or so, and I'll let Scott do the introduction, but we've had this recycling market development plan being developed. You've gotten updates from David Greer, and so the report's been completed. I have not read all 200-300 pages of it. I have looked at the front though, and there's some really good information. So Scott's here to give an update on this. I think this is going to be really informative. And so if there aren't any comments or anything, Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you explain this.
All right, great. Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Also, I did want to extend a welcome to the new members of of the advisory council. Kind of feel like today is the first day of a new school year, and you get to see who's in your class. So a lot of good familiar faces joining the council at this point. So as Dave said, I did want to walk you all through the, let me just get to the right spot. Hopefully everybody can see the screen now. To spend a few minutes walking you all through the recycling market development plan. So I'm very pleased to be joined this morning by Betsy Dorn of Circular Matters, who is our teaming partner as a part of this. I also wanted to point out that Deborah Kantner with Burns & Mack and David Greer, but also Diane Barnes and Susan Palachek with TCEQ were an immense help in completing the recycling market development plan that we'll talk with you all about this morning. So I'm going to start off with the presentation, and then we'll turn things over to Betsy, and then definitely to leave some time at the end to have some further discussion with you all, which I think will very importantly ask about, so what do we do next in terms of potential implementation regarding the recycling market development plan. So especially for those of you all who are new to the council or may not be familiar with the recycling market development plan, this came about based on legislation that passed during the 86th session of our Texas legislature via Senate Bill 649. And so the purpose of this was to develop a plan to stimulate the increased use of recycled material feedstock. And so the bottom half of this slide further details key information that was required by Senate Bill 649 and then is included in the market development plan that we will update you all on today. So again, our project team was led by Burns & Mack in collaboration with Circular Matters, with key efforts by both STAR as well as ReTrack Connect, all in, again, very close collaboration with the TCEQ. There was extensive stakeholder engagement as part of the efforts to develop the recycling market development plan. First and foremost was the survey that was sent out to facilities all across the state of Texas via ReTrack Connect, of which we got very good responses, especially on the municipal side. And keep in mind, this is essentially the third time that we have done some sort of a statewide survey on the municipal side. We had some more challenges on the industrial sector, but if there would be an opportunity to do the survey again in the future, we've got some strategies that we'll plan to embark on in the future. I also want to point out that everything that we did for this plan was during the course of COVID, and that had a real impact on a number of efforts, especially with regard to the survey, as we were looking to get really important business data from companies when sometimes they had multiple staff that were out, unfortunately, being sick with COVID. So that was a real issue. And then COVID did require us to change the format for the stakeholder forums, where we originally were going to do this great roadshow across the state of Texas. That all had to change, but I think it actually worked out pretty well because we were able to add an extra forum and then to organize the forums based on material types in terms of typical recyclables, organic, C&D, and then other hard to recycle materials. So a lot of good information that was provided then. And then we conducted a number of in-depth interviews with various representatives across the industry, businesses here in Texas, state agencies, councils of governments, as well as local communities. As was the case with the study on the economic impacts of recycling, we did create or continue the Recycling Industry Committee, and we very much appreciate the representation of those different organizations that are listed here, as they were helpful in terms of promoting the survey and then also being a good sounding board for any questions that we had during the course of the project. And I would specifically like to point out and express our appreciation to the offices of both Representative Thompson and Senator Zaffarini, who served in ex officio capacities as members of the Recycling Industry Committee. So as was the case with the study on the economic impacts of recycling, with this recycling market development plan, everything that we did was in alignment with state of Texas requirements in terms of what is recycling. And so I won't go through this in detail, and all of this is included in the recycling market development plan. In fact, everything that we communicate with you all today is in the plan, and we'll tell you, just a few minutes how to access the plan. But take a look there if you want to really understand the definition of terms like recycling, MSW, as well as industrial waste. The Senate Bill 649 also specified what material types were to be included as a part of the planning effort. It very closely, but not exactly, aligned with what was addressed as a part of the study on the economic impacts of recycling 4 years ago. And then much of the information in this plan is organized in this manner. So Senate Bill 649 did include some specific language about scrap metal, and what it said is in this first bullet is that it excludes ferrous or non-ferrous metals recycled by a metal recycling entity as defined by, and goes on from there. And so we had a lot of discussion with TCEQ in terms of what this meant and what we should do or not do relative to the plan. And so we thought that it was really important to include the recycling tonnages, recycling rates, and economic impacts of metals in the plan. However, what we did not do is to address the recycling market development aspects as it relates to metal, largely because those markets for scrap metal are already very well established and in place here in Texas. Again, consistent with the prior study on the economic impacts of recycling, this recycling market development plan did exclude the following methods to divert material from disposal. Some of these are what you want to do above and beyond in terms of the hierarchy that are better than recycling, such as source reduction and reuse. But those are just not included in this study, since this study did focus on recycling, but other categories like combustion or incineration, land reclamation, or alternative daily cover are also excluded. So what we're going to do now is to highlight key aspects of the recycling market development plan. So what you see here is the table of contents, and so we're going to go through to various degrees key aspects of the plan in that regard. But one of the things that we do want to emphasize is that the recycling market development plan is designed as a tool and a resource for strategy implementation. So where Dave said it is a pretty thick plan. And so what we would recommend is to utilize it as a working resource. In fact, on the page just right after the table of contents, we included a table. If you can see that, probably can't see right now since I have the screen up, but looks where it specifically says, here's how to use the plan on a section by section basis. So that's a really good resource. And then if you want to figure out where to go to access the plan, it's simply at txrecyclingstudy.org. So to jump into the main aspects of the presentation, I know in the past we've provided more details on the methodology, but I would just encourage you all, if you really want to dive into exactly what we did, to just please take a look at the plan itself. But specifically, we did very much build on prior studies, specifically the study on the economic impacts of recycling that I've been mentioning, which then in turn built on TRDI, which was completed prior to that. So one of the things that you all are probably really interested in is, well, how many tons were recycled, and what is the recycling rate in Texas? And so I'm going to first walk you all through how we completed the evaluations on a material by material basis, and then to walk you through what the responses were, again, by different material types. And then I'll provide you with what the results were, and then provide a comparison to 2015 SEER survey, and then to let you know what it was the recycling rate calculation for Texas. So for those of you all who have seen this presentation before, the way that we structured this report in terms of the material by material analysis, it was similar to the prior studies, but just as a reminder, we communicate how much material is being recycled. In this case, this example is for glass, and you can see what percentage glass represents of the total amount of material being recycled in the state of Texas. Relative to the amount of material that's being recycled, we have communicated what we think the confidence level is in terms of how many of the tons that are being recycled are represented in this study. And then the story gets into what's happening with regard to each material type in terms of recycling. And then the main point of getting data from the survey was to inform the tonnages. So that's communicated in terms of what we received from the survey, which facilities provided that information, but we definitely did not want to reinvent the wheel. So to the extent that existing supplemental data is available, we included that as well. And then we've also provided a comparison to how the numbers have changed relative to SEER. This slide here gives you a sense of, on a material by material basis, how many facilities responded, and then what our confidence level was, and then whether we utilized supplemental data. We also wanted to give you a sense of how these numbers compared to the prior study, and so that's communicated based on this legend that's in the top right in terms of whether there were increases, unchanged, or decreases on this information. So kind of a quick way to get a sense of that. So looking back at the tons that were reported as recycled in 2015, it was close to 9.2 million tons. And so having conducted this as a part of during the pandemic was again a little bit of a challenge, and we were concerned about what type of results that we would get, but we were very, very pleased to be able to include in the report and to communicate to you all today that the number of tons recycled in Texas increased from that 9.2 million to just under 13 million tons in 2019. And then I won't go through each one of these individually, but I think there's some really salient points to be able to make out from this data. So if you just compare the tonnage numbers on the typical recyclables, they were very similar from 2015 to 2019, like glass just changed by about 3,000 tons. The metals were very close. I mean, if you just look at paper, out of 2 million tons, there's a 2,000 ton differential. And that was very helpful for us because it really validated that the data from 2015 going to 2019 being pretty similar gave us that much of a greater sense of confidence in terms of the survey results. But what was really interesting was how much yard waste, brush, and green waste increased in just 4 years, where it went from about 2.3 to 5.8 million tons. And we very much scrutinized these results on a survey by survey basis to make sure that the data we were receiving was accurate, and had a lot of follow-up discussions. And the main things that we were hearing was that there was just that much growth in that side of the business. And so that was really positive to see. As I mentioned earlier, the survey also focused on material from industrial sources. So much of that was significantly influenced on the metals side of things, but we did document almost 7 million tons of material recycled from industrial sources. Then going back to the MSW results, this just really graphically compares what I talked about 2 slides ago, comparing the 2015 with the lighter shade to the 2019 tonnage amounts. So in terms of a recycling rate overview, we did utilize the disposal data that was just discussed earlier in the meeting. And I did want to emphasize that we would really encourage you to take a look at Table 1-1 in the report that identifies points to consider when comparing statewide recycling rate and economic data, because that provides a real sense of what our methodology was and how that may compare to others. And so to get into the recycling rate, the definition of how recycling rate is calculated is shown here. And then in 2015, it was essentially the 9.2 million tons divided by that same 9 million plus the tonnage that was being disposed of at about 31 million tons, which came out to a recycling rate of just under 23%. So using that same formula, we get a 27.5% recycling rate. So where we had almost a 4 million increase in the amounts recycled, there was a pretty significant increase in what was being disposed of as well. Speaking of what's being disposed of, we also wanted to get a sense of the quality of the material in terms of issues like contamination and the value of that material. So this slide gives you a sense of what on the MSW side, what the value of that material is for some of the key categories. So while this did not include all the tons, about 12.3 million tons was worth about $820 million, which did represent an increase compared to the 2015 amount of just over $700,000. And then from a contamination perspective, the weighted average of contamination for the single stream MRFs in Texas was about 22.5%, which was an uptick from the SEER of about 18%, which is not really a surprise. Burns and Mac does a lot of work with cities and their recycling facilities, so we see what's happening from a contamination perspective. So there's another key element of this project, which included the educational aspects, and so we definitely have collaborated with TCEQ to identify opportunities to develop content to hopefully change behavior in terms of what's happening contamination-wise. And then this slide gives a perspective of what's the gross value of the industrial material in Texas, largely impacted or by the value of the metals. The industrial sector is just under $1.4 billion in value. So as far as the amount of materials that could be recycled but end up in landfills, we were able to look at that based on various characterization studies that have been completed. And so what that is telling us based on these different categories, that there's almost 16 million tons of material that could be recycled that is presently going to landfill. And then the rest of these columns communicate what would it mean if you would increase those recovery rates by 20, 40, and 60%. And I'm going to re-show those percentages in the context of their economic impacts in just a couple of minutes. So as we transition over to the economic impacts of recycling, this gives you a sense of the number of jobs that are in place from a collection, processing, and transportation perspective. So it's pretty interesting to see that the number of collection jobs increased relatively proportional, which makes sense since there's just limitations in how much a truck can haul. But the number of processing jobs remained pretty steady between 2015 and 2019. There's a little bit of an increase, but we did specifically talk with a number of the organics facilities where we specifically asked them, hey, with your material quantities increasing so much, why aren't you seeing an increase in the number of processing jobs? And what they said was that they just had that much excess capacity at the time. So that was a positive thing to see in terms of them being able to put essentially more material or more throughput through their systems in a relatively cost-effective manner. So some more details in terms of wages and benefits. Again, with this yellow diamond communicating how those wages were in 2015. So we're definitely seeing some increases in wages. Would expect that trend will continue based on the labor challenges that we're seeing. And then over here provides information on the statewide payroll. And then in terms of the overall economic impacts, when you look at the direct, indirect, and induced aspects, where that gets us to is a value of about 4.8 billion. So that's billion with a B, in economic impacts from recycling in the state of Texas. And that's a marked improvement of about $1.5 billion compared to 4 years ago. And then that would place Texas on par with the petroleum refining and furniture manufacturing industries in terms of the impact or comparison of the recycling sector. And then in terms of the amount of revenue that is earned in terms of fiscal impacts, this gives you a sense of what that looks like in terms of sales tax, property taxes, and other taxes and fees for state and local governments. And then this slide gives you a sense of what would it look like if we were able to increase the amount of recycling based on those 20, 40, and 60% scenarios in terms of additional jobs. And then before I turn things over to Betsy, the last slide that I wanted to communicate is, and this actually came directly out of some of the stakeholder forums that we had, but a question was asked in terms of where can you really create new jobs and how much more feedstock is going to be needed to make those jobs happen. And so based on the data that we had, we were able to take a look at that. And so essentially what this is communicating is in this column here, how much additional recycled feedstock is going to be needed to be able to create 100 more jobs. And so what that is telling us is that areas like glass and paper are ones where you need relatively lower percentages of increases in order to create those additional jobs, whereas other categories like plastics are actually going to require significant increases in the tonnages in order to create additional jobs. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Betsy, who's going to walk us through some key aspects of the market development plan. So Betsy, good morning, and please go ahead.
Good morning. Hope everybody can hear me all right.
You're good.
Good. Happy to be here. Scott gave you the kind of the lowdown on all of the statistics on where we're at from a recycling standpoint and the value of recyclables that are currently recovered. And but the story that is told is that there's a sizable amount of tonnage of valuable recyclable materials that are still being landfilled in Texas, and that if we could get at capturing more material, we could have substantial economic benefits to the state of Texas. So that's the purpose of this project is to figure out where can we put the focus to make the most difference, and how can we improve the movement of material out of the waste stream and into the marketplace. So the work that Circular Matters did on the project was to build on all this data and analyze it to come up with a strategy for recycling market development for Texas. Next slide, please. So first of all, what is recycling market development? There's recycling market development is a form of economic development focused on recycling business activity. It's any defined action to enhance that would result in enhancing the economic vitality of recycling, and we've included reuse also because there are end markets in the reuse sector as well. But basically, it's to work to create a balance between supply and demand. Next slide. So the primary focus of recycling market development work is to increase demand itself by growing demand for recyclable materials and also for the products that are made from those recyclable materials, those recycled content products. Next slide. Some aspects of recycling market development do involve on the supply side, but only to the extent that supply issues are what is causing the barrier to growing stronger marketplace and marketability of those materials. So in some cases, what's holding the market back is not an advantage, or maybe there's a quality issue. How can there be an enhancement of the reliability and the affordability of that supply so that those markets can grow? But there are other aspects of supply development that are really part of ongoing recycling planning work and recycling program development that really don't have to do with recycling market development. So in this project, we focused on the recycling market development side of things. Next slide. We used a systematic approach to carrying out this work and coming up with a recycling market development strategy. And that involved analyzing the supply and demand, identifying barriers and opportunities, looking at tools and mechanisms for addressing both barriers and opportunities, and then looking at who can employ the use of those tools and mechanisms, and how best can the state organize itself in terms of institutionalizing an approach to recycling market development for the state of Texas. Next slide. And so I'm going to talk about each of these different steps, or really maybe actually tracking the sections in the report just to keep the order of the discussion and the flow of the actual contents of the recycling market development report, starting with supply and demand. Next slide. So in looking at supply and demand for materials in Texas, we looked at it on a material specific basis on those material categories that Scott had presented before, some of which were asked for in the legislation, and then a few additional ones like textiles that we included because of the amount of textiles that are in the waste stream in Texas. So we described those material categories and subcategories. We talk about the national, regional, and state material flows. We provide a summary of the nature of the supply and a summary of the nature of the demand for Texas generated material. And then we provided a comparison of supply and demand by material type. Next slide. At the end of this section, we just kind of worked to simplify the final verdict in terms of where is supply greater than demand, where is supply equal to demand, and for what materials is supply less than demand. And this is the summary table of all of that analysis. But there's a lot of detail in this chapter. If you're interested in any specific materials, there's a lot of information in this chapter of the report. So again, barriers and opportunities. We can move on.
All right.
Sorry. So detail. It's hard to figure out how to just hit the highlights. Okay, next slide. We then analyzed barriers and opportunities, and we looked at market trends, both in Texas and across the country, and even globally. We used the survey results and all the other stakeholder input processes that Scott outlined. And then we cataloged what the supply-related, demand-related, and economic barriers for each material type were that we were able to identify based on using all those information sources. And we looked for gaps in the infrastructure, which was something the legislation called for specifically, was to take a look at recycling infrastructure gaps. Next. These are the major barriers that were identified through our research. Several of them are supply side barriers, such as contamination. And some are economic barriers like competition with low-cost alternatives to recycling, meaning it's cheap to dispose of material in Texas, largely. So the focus of the work, the focus of recycling market development work is how do you overcome the barriers that are impeding moving material into the marketplace and the marketability of those materials overall. So the entire rest of the work was focused on addressing the barriers. Next slide. There were a lot of considerations in prioritizing barriers and also materials. If, for example, it wasn't feasible to expand the market in terms of state action or action by actors within the state because the forces at play were more global, for example, then that material type wouldn't, or that barrier would not be given a high priority. So we used a variety of criteria for prioritizing. Next slide. And we worked to try to bring this information forward in a succinct way. We use this kind of consumer reports bullet chart format to show what are the primary barriers that are affecting which material types and to what extent are those barriers at play. Next slide. These are the high priority barriers that were identified that affected multiple material types and not just individual material types. And this chart shows what material types are pertain to those specific barriers. Lots of discussion of that in the report. Next slide. We also prioritize the material types based on what was actionable. You know, to what extent is the problem a market development problem that needs to be fixed, and to what extent can that problem be addressed through recycling market development activity. These are the materials that were identified as high priority for Texas. Next slide. And these are the medium priority material types that were identified. And then we identified two categories, batteries and biosolids, that weren't necessarily to be addressed in the short term, but over the long term, they offered opportunities and there were priority reasons for addressing these materials. For example, with batteries, with the increased growth in electronic vehicle use and the use of solar and other alternative technologies, we're going to have a lot more batteries that are going to need to be managed and a lot more opportunity to capture the value of materials that are in those batteries and to build a better domestic use of those material types. So we did look at long-term opportunities as well as ones that are upon us today. Next slide. So then after identifying those barriers and opportunities, we also looked again at, took a close look at where the infrastructure needs and gaps are. Next slide. And again, we use this bullet chart format to lay out in a simplistic way what type of infrastructure gap existed. Was it collection or processing or end use? And then is the extent to which the existing infrastructure is currently sufficient or needs to be worked on in order to better manage the materials generated in Texas. Next slide. We also we zoomed in on collection and transportation needs and identified rural needs separate from statewide needs. In some cases, it's just a challenge to get materials from rural areas to more distant marketplaces. And in other cases, across the state as a whole, certain materials are undercaptured and there's a need for infrastructure development to capture those materials. For example, residential film isn't currently captured directly from households. Households have to bring that material to retail outlets to be able to recycle it. So a lot of that material just doesn't get captured. That's just one of the many examples that are talked about in the report. Next slide. We looked at where we are in terms of MRFs, and if we are to increase recycling, in this case, a 20% increase would need up to 15 new MRFs, and we need a hub and spoke system to move material from more rural areas into regional materials recovery facilities to process those materials. We also looked at what are the needs of existing MRFs as well as future MRFs to do the job they are intended to do, which is to clean up material coming into those facilities and sort it into marketable grades. Next. We look beyond those infrastructure components across all of the different supply chain, value chain arenas to look at all infrastructure needs, and they're touched upon in the report as well. So now we move on to materials, market development tools and mechanisms. These are tools and mechanisms designed to address the barriers and realize the opportunities that were identified up to this point in the project. Next slide. We identified 43 tools and mechanisms, and we grouped them into 5 categories: information facilitation and technical assistance, preferential procurement, financial assistance, financial and other incentives and disincentives, and policies. And these 5 categories we worked with throughout the rest of the report in the planning process. We have a lot of information describing the tools and mechanisms organized into these categories. And we use these same categories. These are kind of functional activities. We built the strategy around programs of work associated with these 5 categories of tools and mechanisms. Next slide. So here's the next couple of slides show examples of how we've provided information in the report to talk about this. We have a lot of tables that identify the barrier that's being addressed, the materials associated with that barrier, and then what type of tool or mechanism would best address that barrier for those material types under each of those 5 categories of tools and barriers that I identified in the earlier slide. Next slide. We give a lot of information about specific tools and mechanisms and how they can be employed in Texas. And we include examples of what's been done elsewhere and what organizations are active in this arena. For example, the Recycling Partnership and other groups. And then we provide some links for identification of other information sources for people that would like to learn more. Next slide. So after going through all of that, this discussion of all the different tools and mechanisms, at this point, we've just simply identified what are they. We haven't yet figured out, okay, who's going to do what and what's the strategy for making use of them. So that's what is addressed in section 10 of the report. Next slide. So this shows identification of the partners and development of the strategy. Next. Again, we use these 5 buckets of tools and mechanisms as a way we built the strategy recommendations. So all of the work in recycling market development is aimed at overcoming the priority barriers through targeted programs of work that are geared towards addressing those barriers for the priority materials that are identified. And next slide. So we break down each of these different types of programs of work into and just identify some specific actions that can be carried out in Texas. And so I'm not going to go over these all, but if you flip through the following slides, Scott, you can just kind of move forward. It just kind of shows we've identified the primary approaches. These are fairly broadly described here. And then as we move along in our work, we provide detail on what do we mean by this, but it gets more granular the further along you get in reading the report as we move into the next work, which is looking at, okay, what entity in Texas can use which of these tools and mechanisms in the work that they do. Next slide. So in terms of identifying the resources and partners in the state that can employ these tools and mechanisms, we did a lot of interviews and a lot of reviewing of website information on multiple different organizations in the state. 10 state agencies, local government entities, state, regional, and national organizations, the councils of government. And we also developed institutional and administrative recommendations to implement recycling market development for the state as a whole. We have 6 key principles that we identified for effectively managing recycling market development efforts and addressing the funding needs associated with that. Next slide. These are the entities that we interviewed, just their logos, but this was a fun part of the project for me, to talk to all these different organizations in the state and just learn what they were doing and what they thought about what their potential role might be in recycling market development, what ideas they had for how to grow markets in Texas. It was a lot of learning for us, and I think learning for them too in that discussion. Next slide. So here's an example of how what we provided in the report itself for this, in this case, TCEQ, again, organized by those 5 functional areas or programs of work. We identified specific actions that TCEQ could take with respect to information facilitation and technical assistance. And then the following slides just show, again, the detail for the other categories. We did that for every one of these organizations that we examined in terms of their ability to play a role in recycling market development in Texas. Essentially, recycling market development isn't something to be done by only one organization. We are recommending that it be coordinated by a particular entity as a lead entity, but there's a lot of opportunity for a broad array of stakeholders in Texas to participate in recycling market development. So we have principles of approach that led us to these conclusions. These are our primary recommendations on how the state can move forward in terms of what the strategy should be. Number 1 is to establish the Texas Recycling Market Development Center. We're suggesting that housing it within a university could be the best home for such a center based on what has been done in other states that has been effective, and also the strength of Texas's university system and the roles of other organizations. Next slide. The second recommendation was to appoint a recycling market development board so that there would be coordination among the major players in the recycling market development system in the state. And we're suggesting a multi-organizational board with 17 members, and we even identified who the members might be. Clearly, this is a broad recommendation, and as the state moves forward, it may want to tweak the choice of board members, the number of board members, et cetera. Next slide. The third recommendation was to engage the private sector in collaboration and partnership opportunities. And this is so that the skills and knowledges and resources of the private sector are leveraged. And this isn't just a public sector effort to do recycling market development. Next slide. We recommended that there be 2 full-time staff positions created initially to staff the Recycling Market Center. And because you can't carry out recycling market development if you don't have a sufficient staffing to do so. We recommended that there be ongoing data gathering to keep the information flowing so that the recycling market development activities are targeted on addressing barriers and recognizing that this is a dynamic arena with market conditions changing all the time, technologies changing, et cetera. And this program needs to be nimble and flexible and to be responsive to changing conditions. So we do suggest additional studies be done, and we also are recommending that there's performance tracking of the effect of recycling market development activities so that we can determine what's working and what isn't working and where we need to focus more efforts. Next slide. So, that performance tracking occurs, and there needs to be a process of evaluating that information, again, to determine how to tweak the recycling market development strategy and programming to be more effective. Next slide. So in terms of funding, Obviously, funding is going to be critical for doing recycling market development work. You need staff, you need funding mechanisms such as grants and so forth to make a difference. So we've identified a portfolio approach that we're recommending for funding, which includes making use of existing mechanisms more fully, such as pay-as-you-throw at the local level, and also looking at increasing some of the fees that are in place in Texas, and then private funding sources, so that it's a multi-pronged approach to funding and a shared responsibility approach to funding. Next slide. Regarding existing funding mechanisms, Texas currently has a fee of 94 cents a ton for solid waste disposal. The average across the country is $2.30 a ton. We feel that Texas has an opportunity to raise its tipping fee to generate substantially more money. We know that it was higher before, but if we're going to be successful in getting all the value out of the waste stream and into the marketplace, we need funding source, and this is a potential source of funding. Also, there are other opportunities to charge fees on individual material types and get the tire fee back in place, electronics and paint fees, et cetera, in order to better manage those materials. Next slide. But industry funding mechanisms is a big focus on that nationally these days. Extended producer responsibility interests are growing. We have 2 states that have passed EPR for packaging and printed paper in the United States recently, and Texas lags behind many other states in the use of extended producer responsibility for difficult to handle materials, and there's an opportunity to use this mechanism. But we're not recommending how the state make these choices. We're recommending that the state employ a stakeholder engagement process to evaluate all of these different funding mechanisms, and through that stakeholder engagement process, determine what would be the right mix for Texas and how to go about that in terms of legislative action that would be needed. Next. So that's pretty much the summary of, in a nutshell, what's in this plan document. And again, it's just a plan. It's a report that will be on a shelf unless there's a process put into place to make use of it. So as authors of the plan, that's something Scott and I would love to see, that this information be used. The state spent a lot of money on this project, and a lot of time and effort went into it. And so the fun begins now in terms of making use of this information to benefit Texas.
Hey, thank you so much, Betsy. And I'll now turn it back to you, Dave, and other members of the council for any questions that you may have for us.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, let's open it up for questions. There is a lot of really good information. I would encourage you to take a look at it. Yeah, questions, comments, I'll open it up.
Well, if nobody else is going to say anything, I will.
Okay, great.
I've got a specific question first, and then some more general questions. First of all, the specific question is, when you used a $30 a cubic yard fee to value organics, did you consider any kind of distinction between the value of mulch and the value of compost? How did that $30 number come up? And did you gather any data at all to distinguish between production of mulch and production of compost?
Yeah, so great question there, Risa. So we definitely did speak with industry representatives to get a sense of what their value of their material was selling for, and that $80 per ton is essentially more or less a weighted average between the compost and the mulch.
Okay, thank you. One last real quick thing. And I'll have to admit right up front that I haven't spent as much time with this report as I really should have and would like to. So if I just missed something, please just tell me that. But from hearing your presentation, it sounds like there's a lot of focus on traditional recyclables, fine. But I didn't see when you addressed supply and demand, and when you addressed barriers to markets, and when you addressed priorities and infrastructure gaps. For the most part, I really didn't see organics addressed at all. And with the exception of possibly mandates for food recovery, which is a kind of a narrow slice, and addressing biosolids a little bit. I'd just like to make the comment that I would love to see some energy in developing and sometimes redeveloping or re-energizing markets for organics, such as through TxDOT. That used to be a gigantic market and it's almost died. And also ag. You know, if we could spend some time thinking about developing some of those markets to develop the pull rather than the push through mandates, boy, could we ever make a big difference. And maybe that aspect is in here and I missed it, but I'd just like to put my vote in for, boy, that's where some time needs to be spent. Thanks.
Thank you, Risa. And it's a huge document, and there is a lot to go through, and the information is integrated across all the material types. So you can't just pull out an organic section and all the answers for organics are in that one section. So it will require going through the whole document to find those little snippets of recommendations around organics. There are a lot of recommendations on boosting end markets for organics, including DOT use, better involvement of cooperative extensions organizations in the state, and there wasn't as much on the infrastructure needs side as there was in growing end market demand for the final products. But I think you'll be happy when you look through there. I'm sure there could be more. You know, when we're looking across a lot of material types for a state plan, and it's not a plan for each of those material types per se, but we did try to give a lot of detail on individual material types. We also had to make some choices on what are the priorities that need to be attended to in a state recycling market development effort. And some materials, even some of my favorite materials, didn't necessarily make the cut as being the top priority for where the action needs to be in the state to make a difference. For example, cartons, it's a small quantity of the paper stream, and even though there are there's opportunities and needs there, the effort might not result in a lot of additional tonnage diversions. So it didn't end up that high on the priority list as, say, perhaps textiles, which are highly under-recovered. And there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth opportunity for capturing more textiles in the state. So, that doesn't mean I would say don't put focus on cartons, but it might not be the focus of the priority of a state market development effort.
I absolutely appreciate that, and I will spend a lot more time with the document. But unlike cartons, if you really want to make a difference, the organic category is huge.
You're right, and that's why we did put a lot of focus on growing end markets for organic materials, and on the biosolids one, recognizing that the stormy weather's ahead in terms of land application of biosolids, with increasing concerns over what's in this biosolids from the standpoint of things like pharmaceuticals, etc. So this is a report that isn't perfect, and it's only looking at a snapshot of information, and it really will require stakeholder engagement of all of the different industry stakeholders and other stakeholders to continue to fine tune what we do here and how to do it. So please keep their feedback coming, because it's definitely appreciated.
Oh, that's good. Thank you, Betsy. Richard, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Scott Betsy, great, great report. A lot of good information in there. I noticed when you were talking about the portfolio of potential funding mechanisms, pay-as-you-throw rates were on there. Could you describe a little bit more how that might work?
Sure. In certain parts of the country, like up in the Northeast and in the Northwest, pay-as-you-throw is the standard practice for how local governments charge for solid waste management, and also incentivize recycling and incentivize waste reduction. There's a lot of, and it's something that EPA has recommended for decades, but it's an underutilized tool. And Dave Yankee, you could talk about this probably a lot better than I can, but it's an underutilized mechanism in many parts of the country, especially the Southeast and the Southwest. There's just kind of a culture of using tax revenues or fixed fees and not a pay-as-you-throw approach. But it is a mechanism that has an incentive built in to drive more recycling behavior. But you have to pair it. You have to use the best practices approach, right? And you have to pair it with recycling service provision so that there are appropriate opportunities to divert material through recycling, et cetera. You can't just do it only through the fee mechanism.
So, yeah, okay. So I understand it's more of a mechanism then for just creating more material to be out there, not necessarily to be funding a separate program. So a city wouldn't be taking money that's received from pay-as-you-throw rates and then sending some of that money off to the state or whoever for some other program.
Right? No, we're for local recycling market development activity, only in that if at the local level solid waste management is paid for out of the tax base, and there's always competition against all the other uses of that taxpayer money. And by moving towards a user fee system and especially a variable rate system, it does generate funding, but it also does it in a way that incentivizes desired behavior.
Yeah, and Richard, to more specifically respond to what you're asking, yeah, that was intended as only a local solution to incentivize more recycling behavior, and for that to be used on a city-by-city basis and not anything beyond that.
And there are a lot of there are a lot of recycling market development actions that can be undertaken by cities. And you have Austin as a good example of a city that has a lot of strong recycling market development efforts underway. But there are other cities in Texas that do so as well.
Yeah, in fact, Betsy, we shared with the city of Austin some of those economic development opportunities for the city of Austin last night in a public meeting. So definitely right on track there.
Any other questions? I've got just a couple real quick and then see, but Scott, on the yard waste, yeah, I saw that big increase. Was it due to increased volumes from the same customers that were, or folks that were interviewed in 2015, or is it also more folks participating in the survey response, or both?
Yeah, it was a combination of each of those, Dave. And again, because the numbers were coming in so significantly higher while we do a quality assurance review of all the data that comes in, given the magnitude of those numbers, we took an extra deep dive on those and talked to each of the organics companies, especially those that were communicating significant increases in their numbers. And so it was a combination of existing companies just getting more material at facilities that previously existed, companies expanding their markets with new facilities. In some cases, companies had purchased other companies, so there were some aspects of that. So it was just a lot of different aspects, but it to us just really showed that there's just a significant amount of very robust activity on the organics front.
Yeah, no, that's great. So just curious on that. Also, I got requested, are you going to be able to share this PowerPoint with the advisory council?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And then we actually, believe it or not, I think this was we didn't even show all the slides that we had developed. Yeah, so we'll include the more comprehensive slide deck that we can send out. And then I didn't mention this earlier, but we also tried to identify for each slide what figure or table number that it is, so then you can hopefully easily, if you want to see more detail, align that with where it's included in the plan directly.
Great. Thank you. If you'd provide that to Diane, and then Diane, if you could distribute that to us, that'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, and also if the agency wants to even put that out there on the website, Diane, you know, we're certainly fine with that as well, as far as part of the project website.
Check with David DeGreer
Yeah.
on that, since they're the keeper of the of the recycling website. Also, it will be, you know, included in this because this meeting is being recorded, so it will be included in the archived meeting on our, you know, YouTube. So on TCQ's YouTube channel or page. I think there's still a couple more questions. I think Mr. Mayfield and Mr. Amro, Richard, how do you say your last name?
Abramowitz.
Abramowitz. Okay. I was debating that this morning when I was trying to practice and I didn't make it. So, all right, Mr. Mayfield, your question?
Is simply what's the next step? So the report's out there. And so how is this going to move? How do you envision this will move forward? I'm not sure if that's directed at Scott and Betsy or maybe Diane and.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Jeff. And it was one that we did discuss during the STAR Summit last week, where we had a panel discussion. And I think a lot of it is, and I brought up the presentation, that those 6 principles that Betsy walked through, I think to a large extent, it's a matter of figuring out what's going to be the most effective way, if there's agreement, that these 6 recommendations make sense, but what needs to happen for each of these different items to be implemented, because some of these are going to require more action and or activity by the state legislature, for example, whereas others, you know, and that's the case for the first couple of ones, but then like for that third one, you know, that's just really getting more efforts and activities from the private sector. So that one can be done on a less formal type of basis. And so, Betsy, is there anything else you want to add? Jeff's question?
Sure. Just to clarify, the legislation that provided the directive for this plan to be developed ended with saying that the plan was to be released to the public by a certain date. There was nothing in the legislation that said what to do with the plan when it came out. So there isn't any kind of driver from a legislative standpoint to go beyond just getting this report out there. And there wasn't even a budget for getting this information conveyed beyond putting it on the state's website. So the Star Recycling Business Council has decided that it would like to play a role in helping to keep getting the information out there and understood by the broader array of stakeholders that can benefit from it in the state. And the STAR itself has opened up the opportunity for stakeholders to comment on the contents of the plan, recognizing that the plan is final, but that any future actors that want to move forward in implementing the plan or pieces of the plan will have benefit of that stakeholder feedback on the plan itself. In this group, you have the 2 leaders of the Recycling Market Development Council as members. And we had some discussion about how can perhaps the Star Recycling Business Council and the MSWRRAC work jointly in deciding what to try to push forward in the way of actions for the state to pursue. I certainly see it would be something that the benefit that the MSWRRAC would take up as something it would do, as well as STAR doing so. because obviously it affects all the work that you all address in addition to what STAR does. So that would be a topic you might want to take up. To me, a good starting point is determining whether you're comfortable with the idea of pushing forward state action in establishing the Recycling Market Development Council and the Recycling Market Development Board, which would probably require legislation and some budget set aside for that. That the work of that group, the work of the board once formed, could be to engage to employ a stakeholder engagement process to evaluate the funding mechanisms and come forward with specific funding recommendations for carrying forward from there, in terms of further state legislation or use of the existing funds, like existing tipping fee money that's set aside. That was the source of money for this plan itself. So that to me is the starting place, but it is going to take people like you all to decide to try to make it happen and assure that this plan is taken advantage of in terms of it being a resource to guide future state action.
If I can jump in, can you hear me all? Can everybody
Yes.
hear me?
Yes,
Sure.
sir.
Thanks, Betsy and Jeff. That was a kind of a great lead into what I was going to ask and more make a comment. As I mentioned in my opening, I'm the chair of the STAR Business Council, and we will create a process over the next 6 to 12 months to get input on the plan from business and from the industry, recycling industry, and anyone else who wants to give us input, and then develop priorities, looking at the 6 principles and looking at the priorities, what makes sense for industry at this point, to put together something, a package for the 2023 legislature. STAR has done this in the past in terms of creating the process that we've gone through for the last 10 years to get to where we are today with the plan. And we will continue with the stakeholder process moving forward to build upon the recommendations of this wonderful plan. So keep an eye out for what STAR will do from a stakeholder process moving forward.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Any other questions? Okay. What I'd like to do then, just wrapping up on this topic, I think there was a lot of good information. I think if the STAR Business Board, I hope I got that right or close to right, is going to gather feedback, I would like that to come back to MSWRRAC so we could stay informed on this. I think there's a lot of good information there, Scott. And, as it makes sense in coordination with David Greer, to keep the advisory council informed on what you're doing and next steps and where we can be supportive, I would appreciate your coming back. So, okay. Diane, let's see. I think that takes care of the recycling market development plan, and now we're on to approval of minutes and the highlights. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to review those. If someone has and wants to make a motion to approve them, that would be appreciated.
Dave, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Cheryl.
Right. Thank you, Cheryl. So I've got a motion. Is there a
I'll second, David.
Okay. Thank you. So we've got those approved. Diane and I visited in chance on dates. You want to walk through the calendar and proposed dates?
Yes, sir. So I've sent you the dates emailed the other day, but the proposed dates for the 2022 are January 13, April 14, July 14, and October 13th.
If folks have any comments, I know sure we're not gonna, overlap with any major solid waste conferences, WasteCon or some of the others, but I looked at these preliminarily and didn't see any red flags. Anything that jumps out to anyone here on a potential conflict, this is the time to speak up.
Well, I've got a question you may not be able to answer. I wish it'd be nice if you could. Do we have any prediction whatsoever about whether these meetings going forward are going to be in person or entirely virtual? Because the answer to that may affect my answer to the calendar.
Yes.
Yes to what, Chance?
Yes and yes. They'll be virtual, and they possibly will be face to face. If we are to do one face to face, we'll have the option to have that virtual capability along with it. But we haven't been given the clearance to have face to face at this point.
Right. So what I'm planning to do, as I did last year, is to go ahead and send y'all appointment emails as if we were going to be on campus. So as the meetings get closer, say the January meeting, if we're not able to make that meeting on campus, then we will cancel that. You'll see a cancellation, appointment cancellation from me, and then Cody or whoever's helping me with the logistics for the meeting, you will get the invite, the virtual invite. And so that's how that way, if I send them this way, the appointments, y'all have them on your calendar. So you'll know they're there. I think that's what we agreed upon the last couple of years, that was simpler for y'all to at least have them on your calendar now. So I'll try to get that done within the next couple of days for y'all, if not today. And I think so that's it. If y'all are good with those dates, then that's what we'll do. And I believe that Chance is correct. From what I understand, he has more information than I do, but I know that that they were looking at, I think our agenda meetings, commissioner agenda meetings now are both public and virtual. So they have figured out a way to do that in the agenda room, which is good news for us, because that's where we have the meetings on campus. Other than that, that's what I know.
Great. Well, let's get those dates posted then, Diane. I didn't hear anybody oppose them. And hopefully we'll be virtual, if not in January, at least in April or whenever that happens. And Chance will probably be up to 6G by then. So, okay. Any action items to follow up off this meeting that anyone has identified?
Hey, David, it's a technicality. You got a motion and a second on the minutes, but you didn't take a vote, I don't think.
I'm sorry. You know what? And Cheryl texted me and I ignored it. I thought we did it. Dang. Okay. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
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 Perfect. Wow, I messed up. Okay. Thanks, Cheryl. Okay. Any action items before we get to public comment?
The only action item that I wrote down was that we needed to get the presentation slides to the council.
Yes.
And to possibly have, and to ask David Greer to see whether they could put those on the recycling study webpage.
Okay. All right. Any public comments, closing remarks? Well, first of all, is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? I guess I'm going to take that, Diane, as that's a no.
I do not see any hands raised. Wait, I'll take that back. There's Miss Barbara Combs. Well, she had one. Barbara, are you still there? She may have already left.
Okay. Cheryl, you have a question?
Yeah, my closing remark is, Dave, you should never doubt me.
Cody, is
Fair.
Barbara, is Miss Combs allowed? Have you allowed her in?
Yes, I gave her permission.
Okay.
Barbara, you can unmute yourself.
Barbara, I'm showing a mute.
Hi.
There she is. Okay.
I had an earlier question for regarding the solid waste report by chance, and I just really love it and appreciate it, and also just appreciated the review, Scott, of your market development program. I wasn't able to catch it during STAR, so I was really grateful to hear your thoughts. But on the solid waste, there's the garbage per capita on page 19, and I've been sharing with folks that there's a need to get it kind of refined because, like, if you look at Heart of Texas, they came in as 24 out of 24 councils of government, and the reason they weren't hit by a hurricane. It was the Itasca landfill has over 18 counties that feed into it, but all that tonnage is reported under Heart of Texas Council of Governments. So if there's any way in the future to get the data a little more distilled, because probably 12 pounds per person per day for Heart of Texas, and I haven't looked at 2020's report. I'm just going off 19. A lot of that tonnage belongs to Dallas-Fort Worth, the North Texas Council of Governments. So I would just like to see that garbage per capita distributed more fairly, if you understand what I'm trying to say. And if you don't mind, I have one other thought. I visited a fracking waste landfill, and I wish I could tell you the town, but I can send that to you. But I couldn't find their processing facility on the report. They're owned by Sprint. It's a privately owned fracking waste land. I don't know if you'd call it a landfill, but it's definitely processing waste for the fracking industry. And so anyway, I just couldn't find them in the report, and I would think that's kind of a hazardous, or it's a material that should be part of the report. So anyway, that was my only other thought, because there are options, and I'd love for MSWRRAC to even look into this. There was a gentleman who took fracking waste and turned it into asphalt. So I would love to see efforts to move that away from, that legislation that they were considering putting it into the water aquifers, I thought at one point. So thank you for letting me.
Yes. Chance, you want to take that question or comment?
Yeah, I can take it. Looks like Chuck, looks like he has his hand raised. He could take it, but the report is for municipal solid waste. I think that sounds like your site was an industrial solid waste site.
Actually, Chance, I think it's a railroad commission.
Railroad commission.
Oh, okay. Railroad commission. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Ms. Combs. All right, Dave. Back to you, I guess.
All right.
No. Chuck has his. Chuck has his.
No, I just don't know how to unraise it. I'm sorry.
I have that problem too.
All right. No other public comment. This will conclude the meeting unless anybody has anything else. Thank you, everyone, for helping me get through this. Scott has a closing comment or a hand up.
Yeah, just David Greer and I were trading emails, and so he said he can publish the presentation on the website, but then I will also send it out to the members of the council. Hopefully it won't be too big as a PDF to send out, but I'll let you know that shortly.
Just make sure it's reduced size.
There you go. All right. This concludes the meeting. Is that correct, Diane?
That'll work.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.